A lot of engineers worry that, they're essentially leaving their identity behind, right? Like they've gotten this degree, they've always worked in engineering. So moving into more of a technology-focused role means leaving engineering behind. So how can they shift into these technology-focused or oriented roles while still leveraging their engineering background?
I think there's certainly like an understanding and kind of the sympathy that it is hard and your identity kind of shifts. And I think that that's why it is really important for each individual to really understand why this shift is so important to you.
Welcome to this episode of the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to helping engineering professionals find technology that fits their needs. Did you know that the demand for AEC tech professionals has surged by over 30% in the past few years, yet many engineers don't realize their skills in problem solving, project management, and technical design make them the perfect candidates for technology-driven roles. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Stefanie Reichman, PE and Customer Success Manager at Bluebeam Incorporated, about how engineers can successfully transition into AEC technology jobs. We'll discuss the biggest challenges of making a career pivot, the skills that give engineers a competitive edge, and how companies can better support these transitions. If you've ever considered shifting into technology but weren't sure where to start, this conversation is for you. I'm your host, Nick Heim, and this is the AEC Engineering and Technology Podcast. With that, let's jump into today's episode. It's now time for our conversation of the week with Stefanie Reichman. Stefanie, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show and welcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. Funny story. I was actually on the original podcast with Anthony years and years ago as a civil engineering student. I remember thinking he was just the coolest thing. He had like a little microphone and I was standing next to our concrete canoe. And yeah, so this feels like a fun little full circle moment for me. So thank you for having me on.
Yeah, and bringing it back full circle, and I think a good example to the audience of how things can change in not that much time. But with that, we'll jump right into the details. So Stefanie, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, your career journey, and what inspired you to move from traditional civil engineering to AEC tech at Bluebeam?
Sure. Yeah. Quite a loaded question to get started with, but I'm a civil engineer, went to school. I'm originally from New York and thought that I was going to do whatever civil engineering was. At the time, I had no idea what that could mean. But as I was wrapping up my degree, I realized that structures and design wasn't really what I felt was my calling. So I did what everyone thinks to do when they're a little bit confused, and I got my master's. It was really exciting to go to a Big Ten school and do the whole rah-rah thing at Wisconsin-Madison, and focused on construction management for my master's. Worked for an engineering company as a PM, eventually got a chance to work in construction as a BD&C manager, which was a really, really cool opportunity. Ultimately, though, it felt like it just wasn't my time to kind of continue on the construction journey for a lot of different reasons that people, I think, can relate with. Construction is certainly a challenging place to be. It's a challenging place for women to be. Ultimately, I knew I wanted to change and kind of found myself in this weird spot where in school, it was really two options with your degree. It was you either go into design or you go into construction. And I found myself in this weird space where I had essentially tried both and decided both weren't for me. And then it was kind of like, well, what am I left with now? Which was a really challenging place to be. Ultimately, I currently work for Bluebeam as a customer success manager. So it's been quite a change from obviously like what my experience and what my degrees are in. It's been really, really awesome to just like kind of reshift the experiences that I've had into something that aligns a little bit closer to my values and a little bit more of like what I'm trying to do with my career. But yeah, it's a really long answer to where I'm at currently.
Which is really inspiring because you clearly identified the first problem was like what you were doing at the engineering company wasn't working for you. So you made a change. You identified that wasn't working for you. So you made another change. And I'm sure that's got to be helpful to a lot of people out there who are probably in the same situation and just don't know these alternative career paths even exist.
Yeah, it's been really interesting to look back because I think every time I made a pivot for myself, it always felt scary, but it also felt very natural. So the story I had kind of built up, which is my story, made a lot of sense. But now I get to kind of share my story a little bit more with other people, and it has been really, really cool to see their response because it is lonely and weird and scary. So I actually now help people make those types of career pivots themselves to kind of help identify what that is and then how to kind of put together a plan for how to get there. That's been super kind of helpful and healing for me, but also really awesome to see these people make kind of really nice pivots in their own career that again like align with their own desires of what they're looking for out of their career.
And I'm sure, Stephanie, one of the concerns is probably like, what skills can I bring to this really different role sometimes that's entirely new? So then my next question for you is, how did your background in something is like building information modeling, BIM, virtual design and construction, VDC, and project management experience shape your transition into the role that you have now?
Yeah, I think whenever you're considering any type of pivot, really the focus has always been on the soft skills. Obviously, yes, I did have the experience in BIM from grad school and the courses that I was exposed to, and I actually taught a BIM course for a couple semesters. But I think what's really allowed me personally to make those pivots has been a really strong emphasis on my soft skills, specifically like presentation skills, communication skills. Like these are all things that I weren't really focused on in school, but I really got a chance to develop those through work or through kind of my early career. And those have really made a tremendous difference in my ability to make those pivots.
So it sounds like people may have skills that they're not even aware of that are really useful in making that pivot or that change. It's just a matter of figuring out how to bring those to light.
Yeah, and also just focusing on those more. I know it's really scary when there's a big presentation and you don't want to raise your hand because it is really scary, but it is really important to kind of push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone so you can develop those skills because that's really the way to kind of grow and build within your career.
And I think, Stephanie, that a lot of engineers worry that, they're essentially leaving their identity behind, right? Like they've gotten this degree, they've always worked in engineering. So moving into more of a technology focused role means leaving engineering behind. So how can they shift into these technology focused or oriented roles while still leveraging their engineering background?
Yeah, it's a great question. I certainly don't want to make light of the kind of loss of identity. I certainly dealt with a lot of that. I still deal with that at times. I think it's challenging. I got my PE about a year before I left the construction industry. So that was a really big shift for me to have gotten my PE license and then never really use it, but also not really having the ability to even really be in a role or kind of an environment where that's kind of viewed in the same way as I think it is in like a more traditional role. So I think there's certainly like an understanding and kind of the sympathy that it is hard and your identity kind of shifts. And I think that that's why it is really important for each individual to really understand why this shift is so important to you. And it has to be more than, more money or because it needs to be something, on the inside. For me personally, I became a mom. That kind of was the impetus for the change and a lot of the decisions that I made afterwards. I wanted to be a particular type of mother and a particular career woman, and I needed to find a way to kind of bring those two pieces together for myself. Yes, that is very confusing on top of like motherhood, a lot of identity crises for sure. But yeah, I think just like the realization of like the importance in your own why certainly kind of helps bring it back so that when you do have those moments of loss of identity, you can just go back to remembering your own why.
And I'd have to imagine that it's probably easier for you to empathize with your customers who are fellow PEs because you've been in their shoes.
Yeah, 100%. I think for the most part, people do choose to work with me just because they see a lot of themselves in my story. And I think it's always really inspiring, hopefully, for people to see someone who's made a transition that they're looking to make. So in a sense, it's been, that's why I said earlier, it has been quite healing for me as well to work with people, because when I was considering, especially the transition from construction to tech, I didn't see other people making that change. And so it did feel quite lonely, mostly because I was wondering, how come everyone's so happy in their career and I'm over here really struggling with like what's next and what do I do? So maybe those people hang out on LinkedIn and I didn't look at LinkedIn enough back then, but it's been really, really awesome to step into that role now for others.
Yeah, and I can relate, because when you're able to, give people that advice that you wish you had 1, 2, 3 years earlier, it's really fulfilling, because you can, be that person that you wish you had a couple years back.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think that's probably been the coolest aspects of, sharing more of my story on LinkedIn, working with other people, has been for people to see, like I said, themselves in my story and for them to know that they're not alone. I think that's so important in this industry, especially with women in the industry and some of the challenges that they have to face.
Absolutely. So, and Stephanie, we've talked about some of, right? So finding your why, like the reason that you're trying to make this pivot, the positives of let's say pivoting away from engineering but still being able to relate to it. But what are some of the biggest challenges that you faced when you pivoted into AEC Tech, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest one certainly for me was figuring out what to pivot to. I think a lot of people do get kind of caught in that. I think as engineers, we are very analytical. So we love to just do a ton of research and kind of start spinning on this wheel and kind of getting caught in the wheel spinning, feeling like we're making progress, but we're really not. So I think that was certainly challenging to figure out led what was the best role that lended itself best to my interests. The best way to overcome it, twofold. One is, yes, research, but guided research so that you're not just spinning your wheels, but also having conversations with people in those roles so you can learn whether or not that's a role that you're interested in.
Makes perfect sense to me. And going back to Stephanie, like the skills that make this transition easier or give engineers an edge. So we've talked about soft skills, so like
Yeah.
communication, how you present yourself, etc. Any other skills or experiences that give engineers an edge when transitioning into these types of roles?
Yeah, I think more than anything, the industry experience, which, you're kind of naturally getting, that plays a really huge aspect. So I think it's always really important to keep kind of an eye and ear open when you're working to see what kind of experiences can enrich your own levels of experience. But another kind of suggestion here is to also walk around your own office if you're in person and to touch base with like the BD group, let's say, I think is always such a great group to touch on business development to see, let's say, like, am I interested in sales? What is BD? What does that look like? And that way you can just start to have more experiences as you kind of reach out to different departments and learn more about what they do. That eventually can lend itself well to making a transition, let's say, to sales, because you've already done some light BD experiences and you've validated for yourself that when you enjoy it and two, that hopefully you're somewhat good at it, you can take that experience not only to your next role, but also obviously in like an interview where they want to validate that you have some experience.
Yeah, and if you're listening and you're fortunate enough to get that experience, or if you have an innovation department in your company,
Yeah.
also a great place to look, speaking from experience. But if you do decide to transition, it sounds like Stephanie does have some info for us. So Stephanie, could you tell us about your upcoming cohort for engineers? What makes it different than other groups that are out there? And how can it help AEC professionals to transition successfully into, let's say, something different than what they're currently doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So the cohort program was kind of built off of a year of doing coaching with individuals. And I think the one piece that was always missing was the community aspect. We've touched on it a couple times already. There's so much value in knowing that you're not the only person that's struggling, and also a group to share your wins with. So the cohort program is essentially a group of, it's been mostly engineers traditionally, but individuals in the AEC industry, I'll say, um, that want to make a transition, not really sure where. So we kind of start with that, focusing on how to pick what to make a transition to, and then working on your resume, your LinkedIn, your interview, because it all kind of comes together in this kind of community aspect where we meet as a group weekly for 4 weeks to kind of help make that transition a real possibility. So that's a little bit more about the program. I think, like I said, the community aspect is super important to me, but it's also really important that those skills are gained, because most likely it will not be the last time someone's job searching. And so it is really important for me that people really understand, like, what is a quality resume look like? How can you leverage LinkedIn? What does a successful interview feel like, or how to prepare in a way that makes sense? So it's been really, really cool to take all the learnings that I've had from my own career, my own experiences, but also working with others into this program.
Really well said, Stephanie. And I'll second that proposition. Networking in any way, shape, or form is possibly one of the best things you can do. That involves finding a job, but I think Stephanie can probably speak to the same, that it takes time. So better start now than hold off for sure.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's a lot easier when you are in a role to look for a new role. But there's certainly a lot of things, like you're saying, networking. It's a lot easier to network when you don't need something than it is when you do actually need something. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And, to anyone that's listening and thinking about a change, Stephanie's right. It is just so much easier to connect with people and eventually get to your end goal when it's further out into the future. So no better time than now. But Stephanie, then that's a good segue into our next question. So traditional AEC firms, right? So we're not talking about, technology in any way, but what can these firms do to better support engineers that are transitioning to tech roles or thinking about it? Like, I guess from drawing from your experience, what would you have wished you had seen?
Yeah, I think with all things, a lot of it does always go back to communication. I think there's certainly a huge opportunity for companies to have better understanding of what their employees are looking for. I would, of course, want every single person to just be happy in their roles. And I think a lot of people, especially the ones I work with, but it's also true from my own experience, I think there could have been small changes that are made at the company level that will keep people in their roles. Things like the number of hours people work, PTO. I think there's certainly been a real shift in the industry. People don't want to work 60 hours. People don't want to earn their stripes. People don't want to get pushed into the deep end and see if they can swim. Those have been very traditional routes within the industry of, this is what I had to do, so now that's what you're going to have to do. Unfortunately, that's just not the reality. As engineers, we do now, people are seeing, have a lot more opportunities. And so if a role is going to require you to work, your traditional 40 hours, and you get to come home and not be a stressed out mess, and you still get to have your weekends and enjoy them, I think people are more inclined to go that route as opposed to working for a company for, 60 hours a week. That's a really hard conversation to have. And it's quite sad how many engineers, how many people within the industry kind of fall into that, and I'll call it a trap, of almost feeling like that's okay or that's normal, or you, like I said, you have to go through that to earn your stripes. But ultimately we're all humans and nobody wants to work 24/7. We all have other things outside of work that, we want to spend our time with loved ones or do hobbies or activities. And unfortunately, we just can't show up as full human beings when our jobs are too much, we'll say.
Yeah, and from just a just a pure economics perspective, right? If people are given options to have a better work-life balance, have better career trajectory, and get paid more, right? Like
Yeah.
it's not just some concept. It's just the economic reality that AEC firms will be fighting against in the talent pool. So I think it's good for them to take that into consideration, because it's a real threat to their business. And if they can be doing things to retain people, it's going to serve them well.
Yeah, for sure. I know there's so much talk about the labor shortage, and while the numbers are clearly showing that, I also believe that it's a retention problem, not just a labor shortage problem. And I think that has to start with having difficult conversations with the people on your team at the company level, at every single level, to make sure that the people are supported in the way that they want to be supported. So that doesn't mean like the monthly office pizza party. It means having a conversation with the team to make sure that they're being supported in the way that they want to be. We've all been the victim of the pizza party.
love me a good pizza party that probably wasn't even meant ironically. So if you're out there and you're a company putting on a pizza party, just think very hard about that decision.
Yes.
But Stefanie, thank you again so much for taking the time today. What final piece of advice would you give to AEC professionals who want to future-proof their careers and are maybe thinking about a change?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly really hard to, make an assessment on future-proofing careers, but I do think that the emphasis on soft skills is going to be something that always extends. Keep driving with curiosity, keep learning about the industry, what's out there, what's new, what's upcoming, having conversations with people at all different levels across the industry, maybe in different industries, and just keep pushing yourself to keep moving forward, whatever forward means to you. I think those are always really great ways to future-proof your own career.
All right, and in that I heard a lot of basics, and one just being network, because you just never know who you're going to meet and how that could change your career.
Yeah, absolutely. I think pushing yourself out of your own comfort zone, there's no better thing for it. I never thought in a million years that I would be posting content on LinkedIn, and it was weird and awkward the first couple posts, and now I can't really imagine my life without it. But I've also had so many really cool opportunities come out of the fact of pushing posts a couple times. And yes, it felt uncomfortable, but the benefits now on the other side have certainly justified that.
Really well said. And, thank you again so much for taking the time to join us today. If the audience has questions for you, wants to know more about your cohort, the types of clients that you work with, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, best way would be probably on LinkedIn. Stefanie Reichman. You can always slide into my DMs. And then, if you listen to the episode, then throw that into a connection request so I know what you heard. But yeah, I'd certainly love to have the conversation. If you're even thinking about a pivot, or you just want to hear a little bit more about my own story, if you have any questions, then of course, please feel free to reach out. And let's chat.
Stefanie, thank you so much again for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aectechpodcast.com. There, you will find a summary of key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all of your engineering and technology endeavors. Thank you.